Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe here from my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we're going to pick up this shallow podcast from when Isildur starts to sink into the sea, right? Starts to drift along while the ring sinks into the bottom of the riverbed. At which point there's the comment that from Galadriel about how some things that were forgotten were lost, that history became legend and was largely forgotten. No, not in Lord of the Rings. Maybe in the frame narrative that follows the Fourth Age and whatnot, because the story is basically told through a frame narrative wherein the Hobbits have written down the events of the Lord of the Rings. But this whole history was forgotten. Because it became legend, people forgot it. The only ones who seem to have forgotten for the most part are the Hobbits and the odd person here and there in the lands that were once Arnor. But for the most part, Gondor, Rohan, the elves, they all remember for the most part. They remember a lot, and they have a great depth of knowledge of more than 3,000 to 6,000 years of history. Hey, they have more knowledge of their history than we do in the real world. So Galadriel is actually actively lying to the audience here. Those who knew Isildur, the descendants of Isildur and of others associated with the great Númenórean houses, are all aware. Even in some cases, the common folk are well aware. So who forgot it? Did you forget Galadriel? This is where this line doesn't make any sense, and it's actively untrue to the Lord of the Rings. You can catch Galadriel in a lie here. And I find this just terribly distressing and annoying, but as people complained last time and the time before that about us complaining too much about this movie, and we're not going to complain too much over this, just pointing out this is actually a blatant falsehood. The next thing Galadriel says is it was 2.5 millennia that the ring was lost for, which is roughly true, as the ring was found around 2460 of the Third Age by Smeagol, a Store Hobbit. He was the first to bear the One Ring after Isildur's death. He was to become known as Gollum for a sound he often makes, Gollum, whenever he'd be talking whatnot. This name of Gollum, I don't think he produces the sound in the movie, held the ring till 3019 of the Third Age. And thus he lived to be 589 years old, which is actually the oldest living Hobbit in history. The second oldest being Bilbo Baggins, who lived to be 131 years old. We get the whole story of Gollum, which here I would prefer to have it shown in conversation, because Frodo and Gandalf are going to have to talk about Gollum and the One Ring. Best left to Gandalf and Frodo, because that's actually a crucial conversation in the plot, so that we know that Frodo is aware of Gollum. That conversation is not had, that means that Frodo is not aware of Gollum, or at least he'd be aware off-screen through Bilbo. And it's very important for a movie to show the character learning of a character or event on screen. This is cinematic storytelling 101. And so Galadriel recounting this to the audience, to put it bluntly, is a waste of time. Yes, it'll take longer for Gandalf to explain it to Frodo, but that's a much more important scene. We can't have this recounted through Galadriel. This is not sound storytelling. Tolkien in the novel takes the time to write out the scenes where Frodo learns more about Gollum and whatnot. In this regard, it's weird, but the novel does the job of arranging scenes for the movie in a way, and the movie seems to be wanting to avoid those kind of scenes, which, no, you can't.
In my opinion, bringing up Gollum this early seems irrelevant, because you'd need to truly introduce his story when Gollum becomes relevant in the story.
Or when Gandalf is explaining the history of the ring to Frodo. The scene with Gandalf and Frodo also introduces that Sam's a bit of a mischief maker and tends to eavesdrop, and it shows the oath of Samwise to protect and guard Frodo. That entire scene is very important. Here, this is something that could have been cut, and it probably should have. Now, I'm not trying to badmouth the movie here. I am just stating a fact. The movie explains that Gollum has an extended lifespan thanks to the One Ring. Okay, yes, but why not have Gandalf theorizing about it? Because this would allow us to see the intellect of Gandalf, rather than having Galadriel essentially holding class and going, all right, kids, today we're going to learn about the unnatural lifespan of Gollum. You have her. What is, let's say, 30 years old plus 550? Then we get the rest of the prologue, which the prediction that hobbits will soon shape the future of Middle-earth, which, spoiler alert, I don't mind there being a stated fact before the event. That's a very Tolkienian writing style. He presages an event to come by writing it in the past tense and saying, from a point in the future, this is what's going to happen. We then get Bilbo introducing us to the date, the 22nd of September, Bilbo's birthday, to 1400 by Shire reckoning. That's the year. The Third Age. But we're not introduced to the year of the Third Age, which they should have probably popped that line in, because it's around 3018 at this point, and we're gonna then get to 19 in the following year at the end of the Lord of the Rings. They end up showing us the map and whatnot, and this scene is fine. Technically, everything Bilbo says is correct, so I'm not going to offer a correction. We then get introduced to what Bilbo's doing, which is grossly inaccurate to the book. Here, Bilbo says, "There and Back Again, a Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins." Now, where to begin? Which demonstrates that after 50 years since the events of The Hobbit, he has not started his book, which actually he did start, and he had completed enough of it that at one point Mary slipped in and read a bit of his story and discovered how the One Ring works. But by having him not yet started by the time of his birthday, this signifies that Mary could not have done that, so we already have a gutting of a character there and the removal of a major character action from the backstory. But this is the first piece of work that's laid down to destroy Mary as a character and introduce Merry Pippin, the weird amalgamated character who's separated into two bodies but is actually has one mind that we see in the movies. And the reason I'm complaining about this a little is Bilbo did already start. He had completed his book by the time he left the Shire, and Bilbo had almost completed his book by the time he left. A portion of it was not yet filled out as far as the Hobbits knew when they were setting out for Rivendell. In turn, though, technically There and Back Again was sort of completed by the time he left. But, okay, the frame narrative has it that what Tolkien wrote was all 3 large volumes that we know of as the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings, with Bilbo's adventure being the slimmest of these 3 grand books. And so it is in the world of Middle-earth. So for Bilbo not to have begun is actually completely false, and that's not good. That damages the narrative structure of the story. Bilbo's book plays a role in the story itself, as I said, with Merry. And even Frodo. We then get Bilbo introducing the essay by Tolkien concerning hobbits. And this is not a scene that I'm going to actually say it plays a role to an extent in introducing hobbits to the audience so that we get a reading of concerning hobbits. Why not? I'm not going to criticize it too much because this is important knowledge about the hobbits. But the essay is interrupted as Bilbo loses his train of thought, which okay. When someone starts knocking, he calls out for Frodo, whom uncharacteristically in the movie is not in attendance upon his great uncle and adoptive father. And the scene shifts over to under a tree where Frodo is reading a book. What book? We don't know. But the thing is, we get Frodo, whom pops up onto his feet at the sound of someone singing off tune. And of course, that's Sir Ian McKellen, Gandalf. That in the book, no, Frodo did not happen upon Gandalf in his wagon making for Bag End. We don't see Frodo in the story, we hear of him, but we don't see Frodo until the party. Bilbo and Gandalf have their conversation, of course, regarding Bilbo's intentions and what he plans to do and whether he wants to go through with his plan to disappear. I'm not going to comment on the cinematic decision, but as to Gandalf and Frodo's conversation, we're going to analyze that next time. And so don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button to stay tuned for that video, as though you were Eru Ilúvatar bringing down his wrath upon the Númenóreans.